Welcome to the Both Lives podcast, where we talk about pregnancy, human dignity, and the value of every life before and after birth. We are pro-women and pro-life because both lives matter. Hi, Isabel. It's wonderful to have you with us today. Just to get us started, can you tell our listeners, or those who are watching us indeed, a little bit about yourself? Where are you today? And maybe what does the day look like for you later on after we've had our conversation?
Well, firstly, just thank you so much, Dawn, for having me on the podcast. Yeah, really, really excited to be talking to you today. It's lovely. At the moment, I'm actually in the March for Life studio, which is in Birmingham. Got quite a busy day here. The days can be so varied with March for Life. Tomorrow, I'm heading off to the SPUC Youth Conference, which is lovely. That's going to be taking up my weekend. Today I had a radio show this morning with a show called Radio Maria, which I do a pro-life monthly show on, along with my colleague Ben. And just lots of kind of day-to-day things that we're doing. We're actually planning for a men's pro-life conference at the moment. So I'm working a little bit more on that later this afternoon. Saturday, the 18th of April, in case any men anywhere are listening. We've got some great speakers for that from different Christian faith backgrounds and things for all, different types of men at different stages. So that's something that we're really working on at the moment, trying to kind of encourage men. So that's what things are looking like for me at the moment. Maybe just to give a little bit of background, I've been doing this work for well over 20 years now.
And when you say this work, Isabel, what do you mean?
Yeah, so in a way, I'm just talking about pro-life work, but generally that started. I would say I've always been pro-life because I just think that's the default position for anyone, unless they're taught to dehumanize children, which thankfully I wasn't. It would have been probably in my 20s that I first started sort of maybe being a bit more active. And that was when I started going outside an abortion centre in Birmingham, which was about an hour from where I lived. There were already some people who were praying there. I actually remember picking up a magazine that had a letter someone had written in it about their own experience praying outside an abortion centre. I don't know who that person was, but I'd love to just say thank you to whoever they were, because they really helped to start my pro-life journey, And that helped me to find this group of people that were praying outside the abortion centre in Birmingham, and I went to join them. They were a lovely, welcoming group. And that just reminds us of, that kind of human side to it. I think that's really what made me stick there. I found the work to be really important, but they were so welcoming and friendly that really helped. And then, obviously later on, I helped to form that into the 40 Days for Life, because to start with, that was just a handful of people just praying for an hour on a Saturday each week. But we got 40 Days for Life started from that, and that grew. And obviously, much later on, running March for Life and all the work we do with March for Life. So it's just kind of grown from then. I don't like to say organically in as much as it's required an awful lot of effort, but sometimes things have just sort of taken off, and you've realized that, that this is something like with the March for Life. The first time we did it, it was just a midway event for 40 Days for Life. And then we just thought, this is going so well, we've got to carry on and make it a national annual movement, So
maybe if I interrupt and we break that into a couple of different things, then right at the start of you sort of answering my initial question, you said that you think everybody begins with a pro-life perspective, and then effectively we learn to dehumanize the unborn. Now that's something actually I similarly I would say, maybe for someone who's never thought about it before, can you unpack that a little bit? What exactly do you mean? How do we learn to dehumanize, and when do you think that happens?
Yeah, and I think it can be very subtle, Dawn. I think, and maybe sometimes unintended as well, and obviously it can happen in various ways, but particularly if we're talking about the unborn. I think as soon as one understands that, if we're just talking purely from science here, nothing to do with politics or religion, but if we just purely understand from a scientific perspective that life begins at conception, which is a medical fact, then, once we've understood that, then why would we try and negate something which science is showing us that this is human life? Obviously our faith helps to give value to that life, or helps show us the value of that life. And I think unless there is actually somebody saying this isn't human, or this isn't a valuable human, then I don't think there's any reason for, certainly as a child or a youngster, to believe any different. A bit like, that, people often sort of maybe parallel other eras in history, and sometimes people find this helpful or not. But, like, we would look back and see, like, people who kept slaves. We would think, oh, that's, and obviously maybe some slaves were treated better than others. But if we're talking about slaves that, when they were really kind of dehumanized, treated as being lesser or some sort of, subhuman, we would look back with horror at that. But in a way, many people kind of bought into those lies because it was sort of subtly introduced, maybe at a sort of younger age. They grew up thinking it was them and us, and there's a difference. And I think, people, were almost sort of brainwashed into thinking that. And it was a nice sort of the elephant in the room that people just maybe never actually discussed, of like, well, why do we think this slave is a different species to us, or of different value to us? Because surely we can see they're human like us,
Yeah.
and in a way it's the same sort of thing with abortion. That it is, sometimes it's the elephant in the room. We don't actually discuss, what does it mean to be pregnant? What is it? What is this inside the womb? Why do we think it's of less value than when it's outside the womb? Outside the womb, these are kind of real basic conversations that we're almost taught what to have.
Yes, exactly. And I think on one level it is very simple, isn't it? When you see tiny children who respond so positively to
Mm,
someone's pregnancy,
yeah.
whether that's their mummy or somebody in their family or a friend, but they know, I mean, obviously, it's communicated with them, there's a baby in mummy's tummy or something, but they are very connected to that pregnancy bump. And I do think that children then, as you've said, are instinctively pro life. They understand what a baby is, and they are very affectionate to the tummy bump. And then as they get older, then they can learn to support abortion or the choice of abortion.
Mm, mm,
Um, the other thing that struck me in what you said was, you started gathering with other people, and that it was the people before it became a thing, 40 Days for Life, that you helped establish in the UK and in your area. But it was the people that kept you involved. And if we connect that maybe to what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, people and community in this space are very important. Is there something that stands out to you, or someone that particularly stands out, from those early days of gathering to pray?
Well, I think not only were they really kind of welcoming, friendly people. I think I felt, I'd found people who understood my thinking as well, and that was really helpful. When I went to school, they weren't particularly of the same faith, maybe a lot of people as me, maybe didn't particularly share the same views. I remember doing my A levels, and a lot of people would have had very different views to me from a pro-life perspective. I was used to mixing with people that might have very different views, and to suddenly be with people like, yeah, you get it, that itself was really heartening. And made me feel quite at home with them right from the start. I mean, they were quite different ages. I have to say, the people who were there to start with, more of them were kind of older people. Um, but in a way, it was sort of like, I think that stopped there being any barrier to do with ages, because we just so much kind of connected with what we thought, and also on a spiritual level as well, and them understanding it from a spiritual perspective. And I think that was just it. It was really helpful to me, and I felt, like I say, I felt very much at home, and at one with them.
And as you say, it with hard work, not organically as such, but with hard work, then it became more established and organized. For anyone who hasn't been to a prayer vigil, maybe for want of a better phrase, outside an abortion clinic, can you describe what those look like? And I know you can't speak for everything across the country, but there's a lot of negative press. What does it look like where you are?
Yeah, so I mean, like I say, we've organised the 40 Days for Life. So before 40 Days for Life, I was almost joining something that someone else was sorting out. But then once I think 40 Days for Life helped me to kind of give it some kind of structure and more sort of guidelines for people had to sign a statement of peace before they came, for instance, to show that they were going to be peaceful, lawful, loving. That helped you to know that the people coming along with you would also be of the same mindset. So I think there was things like that helped it become more structured. So, for instance, with 40 Days for Life, a lot of people will know that this is an international movement. It runs in towns and cities all around the world, but it will be it will be structured to suit that culture. So often, if people might go onto the 40 Days for Life website and they might sort of think, oh, that looks a bit American. Well, that's because it is a lot of the pictures, and that's suited to the American culture, and that might not suit the British culture. Equally, it might be that, somebody takes the movement to Spain or to, wherever it might be, and it's more suited to them. And I think people can forget that. People can look across and think, oh, that looks a bit awkward for whatever reason. Just as people might look at our 40 days and think that wouldn't work in our country. So I just think it's maybe worth just saying that I think, people adapt it while there's some basic, sort of structural guidelines that will apply to the 40 Days for Life everywhere. It's held at the same time in the different countries. And obviously for 40 days, as the name would say, it can be adapted to suit that country. And I think that's important. So here in England, where I am and further throughout the UK, I think they would be very peaceful vigils. I mean, when I've organised mine, we have 2 or 3 people at one time. We don't have a big crowd outside an abortion centre, particularly when it was open. We want to be approachable to women or to couples who are going in for an abortion. Actually, we had no posters at all when we were outside the abortion centre. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to have a poster, but I guess we were particularly mindful. It was a residential area. We wanted to make sure that people didn't think that we were some kind of picket line that was just there, to shout angry words or say, this is what we oppose. We were actually there to offer alternatives, and also there for people who'd had an abortion to maybe point them towards where they could get some healing. So we really wanted to be able to connect with particularly with women, but also with the men that were coming there as well. So we would have leaflets that we would offer, leaflets that had details, crucially, of help that was available. We'd talk a little bit about the development of the baby, because I believe every woman going for an abortion should know about that before she can make, or to enable her to make an informed decision, as well as about some statistical risks associated with an abortion as well, which again, I believe that every woman has a right to know. So we would simply stand there, and as a woman was going into the abortion centre or towards the abortion centre, we would just say, would you like a leaflet, or is there any help we could offer you? If she said no, or if she just ignored us and walked on past, that's the end of the conversation. We respect people's free will, even if I don't agree with the decision they're making. But for those that, were interested, they might stop and say, what kind of help can you offer? Or maybe they'd even just say, I don't know whether you could help me. And a conversation would start, And I know many, many women who then continued a pregnancy because of that.
Well, I was just going to ask, what was the response to your presence and the help that you were offering from the women who were going in? I mean, not that there's any one response, but what types of responses did you have, or do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say the largest group of women maybe just were sort of ambivalent, didn't take a leaflet, didn't particularly connect. The next biggest group would probably be the ones that would stop, would take a leaflet, or even if they didn't stop, would take a leaflet and said, thanks, I'll read it when I'm in there, or something like that. And then there would be a small group that sometimes would be maybe more angry, And obviously we don't respond with anger. If someone, were to, for example, just say something, unpleasant or something like that, we just wouldn't respond. So yeah, we certainly wouldn't be there to get into kind of like, tit for tat or anything like that, should anyone say anything unpleasant. But yeah, I mean, it was surprising in a way how many, or at least it was to me initially, before I went, I maybe thought that women, when they went to an abortion centre, had decided they wanted an abortion. That's what they were going for. I spoke to a lot of women who maybe were uncertain about what they wanted to do. And equally, a lot of people who genuinely had no idea about any alternatives or any help that there might be. And sometimes even women coming out of the abortion centre, they might not have had an abortion, it just might be the initial appointment. And they still had no idea about what alternatives, where they might get like financial help, accommodation, baby goods, anything like that. Even though we were right outside the abortion centre, they wouldn't be being told this by anybody, or about any other groups. And that was really sad. And like I say, to start with, quite eye-opening.
So in a couple of ways, I suppose, I mean, your motivation for being there is to initially to pray, motivated by your faith, because you're aware of both lives, the woman in need and the unborn baby. But as time went on, what I'm hearing you say is you increasingly realized the worth of what you were doing, because you weren't convinced that women were receiving all the information they deserved, whether the gestational development of their baby, the reality of abortion, or alternatives to abortion. So the longer you did it, the more convinced you were that it was needed. And maybe that leads into, that's right, that's fair of me saying that. Do stop me if you think it's not.
No, carry on, Dawn. Yeah.
But I suppose then that speaks to, even when you started to face legislation at a council level and then national that was restricting a presence outside an abortion clinic, is that why you kept going into those sort of vicinities? Can you maybe speak to that a bit?
Yeah, and I guess I would just add something else. I think also I became more and more aware of the damage of abortion through being there. And that was, again, something maybe that, whilst I was aware of in some way, it became really evident and maybe a little bit more personal to me. When you can see the women coming out, like sometimes just sobbing straight away into their phones because they're by themselves, or just vomiting in the gutter and things like that. It's like, how is this pro-women, So I think that really alerted me more to the damage of abortion. I'm not saying everyone came out like that, but you could certainly see that, and also I think the kind of spiritual aspect really deepened for me. And I think that's something that sometimes people maybe don't recognize enough. Whilst very much I want to go there and offer help and alternatives and support to women, our faith is only really faith if we try and like live it out, and certainly towards our fellow men and women, we need to do that. But obviously, as a Christian, my relationship with God is of primary importance in my life. And I do think that abortion, it grieves the heart of Jesus. It grieves God's heart. Jesus has a human heart, and I think it's grieved by abortion. Not only with the lives of children that are not being accepted, not being welcomed, this precious gift of life that he's giving, and it's almost being thrown back in his face. But also he grieves to see these women being hurt by seeing men who aren't living up to what they should be as fathers, and hurting themselves as well as other people in the process. That wounds Jesus's heart. And I think going there from a spiritual perspective became more and more important to me as well. So that even on days when I would be going there and the abortion centre was closed, I didn't think, oh, well, what's the point? I still felt it was really important to be there from a spiritual perspective at that place. And I do think presence is important. Sometimes people will say, well, can't you pray in a church? Can't you pray from, 100, 200 meters down the road, or from your house or whatever? And you can, because of course you can pray anywhere. In fact, we're told to pray at all times. So clearly, we're supposed to pray everywhere and anywhere. But I don't think that means presence isn't important, and as a Christian, if, for instance, if I reflect on the crucifixion of Jesus, we see that Mary, his mother, that John, his beloved disciple, they were at the foot of the cross. They could have just stayed home and thought about what was happening. They could have, gone to the synagogue, the temple, and prayed there. But they actually wanted to physically be with Jesus. And again, a different time in Jesus's life, right at the very kind of beginning of Jesus's life, we see, if we look at the visitation, when did John the Baptist leap in the womb? When Jesus was physically present, when he was in close proximity to John, that was when John leapt in the womb. So I think we can see that presence is important. In fact, in a way, you could say this is like a key part of the gospel message. God became man. He could have willed our salvation from a distance if he'd wanted, but he wanted to physically be with us. So
There's something very powerful with that, the physical presence and
Hmm.
then the spiritual presence. When you are physically somewhere, and in particular in these circumstances, given the attacks and accusations that you have faced. So I think I'm right in saying you've been arrested 3 times. Is that correct? And investigated 3 times.
So I've been arrested twice. So I was first arrested
Twice.
in the
Okay.
end of 2022. And I went to court and was completely acquitted. I was then rearrested just 2 or 3 weeks later after that, standing on the same spot, doing exactly the same thing as what I've just been acquitted of. But that was when 6 police officers arrested me. And I was investigated for 6 months after that, but then they dropped the charges. But now I've been charged again. I wasn't arrested this time, but I've been
Okay.
charged. So I'm
Okay.
due to go to trial. It might end up being next year.
But that's under different legislation because,
Exactly.
yes.
Yes. Yes. And I think that's worth noting, Dawn, because I know sometimes people have said, "Oh, can you be tried for the same thing? What's going on here?" And obviously, before it was under the local law, the PSPO, the Public Space Protection Order. So that's when the local council and the local police work together. So that was a local law that I was being charged under. Now it's the national buffer zones. This would be a national law that I'm obviously being charged with breaching.
And for anyone who's listening and is now thinking to themselves, what? Like they don't understand. We've been talking about you praying. We've been talking about you wanting to offer help. You're peaceful. You're not engaging in any signs of protest, or if someone responds angrily, you're not responding angrily back. What exactly were you charged with?
Yeah, and I think again, obviously I'm limited with what I can say on this, and and I know a lot of people will be aware of that because there's still live proceedings taking place. But sometimes people have said, well, what else was actually going on? What was really happening there? I was simply silently standing in the, near the abortion centre, not blocking anyone's way, and I haven't been accused of that, not engaging with anyone at all in any way. I wasn't speaking to anyone, no posters, no leaflets. I wasn't on my knees at the door, sort of, looking up at people pleadingly. I was just simply standing there innocuously within the buffer zone.
On your
So
own?
absolutely on my own, silently praying. So, and no kind of signs of that, if you like. So I wasn't carrying a Bible or rosary beads or, anything that would sort of look, even religious. Not that I think that having religious symbols should be in any way a problem, but I wasn't even doing that. So simply just standing silently inside the buffer zone and obviously in my head praying.
And for people maybe who aren't as aware of the legislation or what goes on, in the UK, in the context of laws that limit activities outside abortion clinics, as you've said, there were public space protection orders initially, but then in the last few years in England and Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, legislation has been brought in that establishes maybe what some people call buffer zones, or the legislation terms safe access zones. Now, if I even think back to Northern Ireland, the accusations would have been that there was harassment and intimidation of women, and current laws, existing laws that protect women from harassment and intimidation weren't sufficient, and therefore specific legislation directly related and only related to abortion clinics was required. And that's then similarly, that's been what's been brought in England, I think in 2024, is that right? 2025 maybe?
2024,
Yeah,
yeah.
2024. Yes, 2024. And this is where I suppose the most concerning aspect, different people might have different opinions about whether or not anybody should be outside an abortion clinic. Some people think they term it as healthcare, and they would question anyone being there. So if we set that to the side, what's very much concerning, I think, is that we're talking about influencing being a crime. And in your instance, we're talking about, were you silently praying? Is silent prayer a crime? Is thinking a crime? So it could be that in the UK, we are establishing a new era of thought crime. I mean, that's what this comes down to, isn't it?
Yeah, and in a way, I could do a whole episode, Dawn, on how buffer zones came into place. I've got an awful lot that I could easily say about that, off the back of a lot of hearsay and gossip, really, that they were ever introduced. And it's interesting, we look at, how many people are actually charged outside abortion centres, pro-lifers, of being antisocial or criminal. I don't know of anyone. And yet I know we actually were the victims of assaults by locals. We even had to take it to the police. We had to get what's called restorative justice done. So it was accepted that people were behaving badly. We were, physically assaulted, not by people using the abortion centre, and I think that's important to mention, but by intolerant locals or residents in that area who would be abusive, who would be physically assaulting us, who would be driving down the street at high speed towards two young women and mounting the pavement in their cars as though they were going to hit them. Numerous incidents which were either certainly very antisocial or criminal in their nature. And yet we were told that crime was increasing in the area, and so they needed to bring in buffer zones. They negated to say that the crime was against us, that we weren't the perpetrators, So there's a lot of misinformation around this, or dare I say it, lies about these situations that brought it in. We know that I'm trying to think of the year now. It might have been 2018 when they actually did some investigation work into vigils happening near abortion centres, and it was deemed that it wasn't appropriate to bring in buffer zones.
Yes, at a government level, there was an investigation into that, and certainly in Northern Ireland, I remember before the legislation was introduced, the safe access zones. We appeared. I would have spoken on different radio shows. Not that as a group, as both lives, we don't do that, but we would have spoken and defended the right to be outside and to offer support and help, and would have talked about existing, legislation that would have protected against any intimidation or harassment, and would have said, of course, that no woman should be intimidated or harassed. But then if these things are happening, where was the evidence? And surely if they were happening, the police would be prosecuting. So yes, I know you can't really say a lot more about the current case, but I wanted to raise it because people will have, I'm sure, seen you with media coverage. I wanted to ask you what we could and encourage people to be just be, if they pray, then to pray for you, but also just to be mindful of the bigger picture of this. As I said, I think your legal team talks about the the era of thought crime. And that's what we wanted to really raise, so that people can be aware of that as such an important issue. If we move on then to the other aspect of your work, and I think that's primarily where I came across you as the co-director of the March for Life in the UK. Now, again, it has a particularly British aspect, I think. The first time I went over, and it was just a couple of years ago, in September, to the March for Life, I was, if I'm honest with you, I was a wee bit nervous because I didn't know what it was going to look like, and I didn't know whether there would be protesters or trouble, or it'd be very aggressive, and the sorts of people who'd be there. And actually, I found it very inspirational. There was a real sense of joy and a celebration of life, obviously the March for Life. So for people who don't know what March for Life is, and I know it's much bigger than an annual march, give us an idea of the aims and objectives and why indeed you helped establish it in the UK.
Yeah, there's so many kind of angles to this, but I think it is really important for us to come together, and I think that's one thing. I think having a physical presence in the streets. We know of women who've changed their mind about abortion from seeing the March for Life. People who had abortions booked and saw the March for Life, talked to people there, listened to speeches, and then went home and cancelled their abortion.
Okay, so can we just stop there, actually, and because that's amazing. Is there a particular maybe story that you can share with us?
Well, there's a particular lady who I know has kind of publicised her story, so we don't mind sharing it. A lovely lady called Sophie, because she came back the next year and got on stage with her little baby Riley, and again she doesn't mind his name being shared. And she said, who she remember her saying to the crowd, "Who was here last year?" And lots of people said me, and she went, "Thank you for being here." She said, "If it wasn't for you being here, I wouldn't have my baby Riley now."
Wow.
A lovely lady who literally had her the march was on the Saturday, and I think she had her abortion booked for either the Monday or the Tuesday the following week. And she was just doing her shopping in town and encountered the march. And one of the key things she said, because that was one of the early marches in Birmingham, and there were some protesters there, and she saw the protesters, and she said they looked very angry. And then she looked at the March for Life, and she said they looked so full of joy, and it made her think, gosh, which side of this do I want to be on, And she realised that her choice that she was thinking of making was actually this choice that was on the side of these people who were really fueled with anger. And that's what stopped her initially to talk with us. She said she saw a big poster that said, I think it was one that said, "This is a life, not a choice," or "This is a child, not a choice," or something like that just drew her in. And then she talked to another young woman there called Bernadette, had a long chat with this young lady called Bernadette, and ended up, like I say, staying and listening to all the speeches and exchanging numbers. And we're still in contact today. She's absolutely delighted with all her children. She's got quite a few little boys.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And I think, for any of us in this space, you're not doing it to be seen or heard as you. It's the heart of the work, and it's the fact that, it's for life. So to have a marker that is so tangible in front of you, to see and hear from this young woman, and then see the life that has been born directly as a result of the march, must have really made your heart soar.
Oh, it was a real tearjerker, like literally.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think one of the things, because I know she kept mentioning to me about this poster that she'd seen from a distance. It was a big blue poster I think it was more like a banner, with two poles that someone had brought along. And that made me think, imagine those two people who were holding that banner, if that morning they thought, oh, you know what, let's go and watch football instead, or whatever it might be. Would that result have still been the same? I don't know. Maybe it would have. But it does remind you, because you can think, once you have a big march, we have about 10,000 coming each year. It can be tempting to think, well, what does my little presence matter? There'll still be 999 people there. What's the one difference? You don't know who God has planned to encounter you that day, and you might never know, because it's not that always somebody comes up and says, thank you, I've noticed you, and you've made a difference to me.
Yeah,
So I think that importance of that one person, each of us playing their part in it, obviously
yeah.
contributes to being this big movement that really gets noticed.
Exactly. And so sometimes, I mean, and certainly from my perspective being over, I mean, I would have no idea of maybe the impact from March that you will hear as one of the directors. But even for me being there, well, if we talk about the people that come, and you've maybe seen a difference, I don't know, over the years, obviously in numbers, but I think what really sort of struck me was the age range. You had older people, so many younger people. I was delighted when I saw that younger generation, families, small children, babies in prams, people of many different backgrounds and faiths,
Yeah.
lots of banners. I think that was the thing that impressed me, that it was a very clear direction. You were quite specific in the banners that maybe wouldn't be allowed. So there was certainly no sense of intimidation or anything threatening. I would I would encourage anybody, who hasn't been before, to go along. It's in September every year, the first Saturday in September, isn't that right?
Yeah, so this year it's the 5th of September. And also beforehand as well, we have like a big event. It's a big building called the Emmanuel Centre. And that's a chance for us just to get together, inside, again, a very sort of safe space for people. If you're somebody who's not used to doing anything pro-life or being actively sort of pro-life and things, it's a very safe space to be in. And you can see all the different stalls that are kind of showcasing their work. We have a big pro-life summit in the morning, because this year our theme is abortion hurts the family. So the summit will be kind of themed to connect with that. It'll be a kind of pro-life family summit, and lots of talks to do with the family and the different places that people might be within their family and things. So that'll be looking at that. And actually this year as well, for the first time, we're looking at having a separate youth summit in the morning, very near to the Emmanuel Centre. So there's lots going on kind of the whole day to help connect us as pro-lifers. And I think that's really important as well. Whilst we're going, being an outward sign to try and help people learn and find out more about the pro-life issue and open hearts. And obviously there's a prayer element as well. But I think it is important. We need to kind of connect with each other. And I think that helps to build up the pro-life community, which is ultimately what we need to, for the future. We want a real community feel to the
Yeah.
pro-life movement. And
I'm
that's
delighted that you went there, because I was going to ask you about that as well. And, as both lives, in our inception, we co-founded with another couple of groups or organizations. We now sit within the Evangelical Alliance, but collaboration is very much a part of our heart. And actually, the Evangelical Alliance is one of our core values. We're relational. And I think, on the website, it's made clear that you're looking for collaboration. You're looking for community. You're looking for those who value life. Maybe different people do things in different ways. But this is a place where people can come together and publicly witness to the value of life. So yeah, I would just encourage anyone who hasn't been to consider going this year. And I know that's giving you a plug, and I don't mind that at all. As I said, I've been a couple of years now, and it's brilliant. As we draw things to a close, Isabel, because I could keep chatting to you for ages, but we do have to finish. As both lives, we talk often, and in our vision statement, we talk about imagining a people in place that values the lives and health of women and unborn children, and pursuing the well-being of both. So as a final question, or just opportunity for you, I wanted to ask you how, in your space with the work that you do, what does it look like to imagine better for women and children in the UK?
Yeah, and that's a lovely and such a far-reaching question, really. And I suppose, like, naturally, the first things you start thinking about are what kind of practical changes need to happen, and you know, the resources that need to be there for mums, for couples, for families. But I guess, kind of underpinning all that, I think it's a real spiritual awakening that we need to have both lives really valued, and that's something that I think is really important if we are to really value both lives. It requires us to see things from a spiritual perspective, because I think it's our faith that gives value to life. I mean, it's science that tells us when life starts, but it's our faith that tells us why that life is so valuable, you know. And I think the more we develop our own relationship with God, if it's a true relationship with God, a real personal relationship with Him, then I think our eyes are opened more to how valuable both the mother and the child are, and of course the father. You know, the whole family. You know, whether that man and woman carry on together or not, they're still, like, really, really valuable. And that means those who've been through abortions, those who've been impacted, those even who perform abortions, are so valuable in the eyes of God. You know, and I don't think the pro-life movement is one of condemnation, but one of transformation, really, like helping people. Yes, we want people to see that they've done something wrong if they've had an abortion, if they've, you know, worked in abortion industry, but so much more than that, because we want them to see there's something so much better for them. You know, they can be incredibly powerful voices within the pro-life movement if they want to be. They don't have to be. They don't have to, certainly, I mean, share their personal stories, but just to be present within the pro-life movement is something that everybody can aspire to. So I think, you know, changing ourselves to become, you know, really deeper Christians, so that, you know, we have a real true relationship with God, then we aren't pro-life people who are maybe harsh or judgmental towards people who are in different situations to us or have got into difficulties. We're not like the Pharisees in the Bible that, like, heap up heavy burdens onto men's shoulders but don't do anything to lift them. We're there to help because we see Christ in our fellow, you know, men and women around us. And I think that's what it's really about, is a real spiritual awakening. That is something both us and God, and then us and God in those around us.
I think that's a lovely place to finish, Isabel, to really imagine a society that is transformed so that life is valued from its conception until natural death. So thank you, and we wish you all the best with the ongoing investigation and or prosecution, don't know the right word, but thank you for joining us today.
Thank you to anyone who has or will pray about this. We really, really do need it, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dawn.
Hello and welcome to a new segment that we are introducing for season 2 of the Both Lives podcast. And this segment is going to contain cultural commentary on news stories, what we're seeing on social media, but most importantly, it's going to be featuring your voice as our listeners and our viewers as we reflect on your comments and questions.
So yeah, Lisa, you were just telling me, even though it's only the teaser that has gone out, we've already heard from a listener. So you said you had a question for me from them. What is it?
Yes, so question from our listener is, Dawn, if you could pick one dream guest to appear on the podcast, who would it be and why?
Do you know what? I think I would love to meet Mary Stopes.
Oh.
Because now, for anybody listening, I am not an expert on Mary Stopes. I don't know an awful lot about her as a woman, and indeed the history of the organisation. But I do believe that she didn't actually support abortion. She set up to help married women with birth control, spacing and planning their families. But I do believe she, as I said, opposed abortion. She's a contentious figure for many reasons, but I would love to meet with her and talk to her about the nearly 11 million abortions in the UK, talk to her about sort of the evolving story of family planning, and see with hindsight what she would think now of maybe what has been done in her name. So yeah, that would be my guess.
That would be fascinating. You spoke of the word evolving there, and something that happens with lots of conversations and news stories is that they are live stories, and so they're always kind of developing and evolving. Even from the conversation that you so recently had with Isabel, there's actually been new updates, if you'd like to let our listeners know what they are.
Well, yeah, no, it's not actually a court update. When I first read it, I saw on social media that she'd put out a post today and thought, oh, something's happened with the sort of the courts. But she was just updating someone who's commented on what's happening in the UK to do with freedom of religion and thought. And she was just letting them know that she has now been charged for a third time and will be facing trial again later this year. So it was just a reminder that, you know, news stories move and people can forget. But obviously we've just had the conversation with Isabel, and there you go, in just a couple of days back on social media, reminding people that for her this is going to be an ongoing journey for quite a number of months. And so she was asking for prayers for justice and prayers for support for her.
And as you said there, with social media, like, stories can be so quick in their development and updates, and we know that firsthand, that we post on social media really regularly. We're still trying to figure out the algorithm, but it's been fascinating to kind of look at the debates and comment sections and things like that, and which has been a brilliant reminder of why we make this podcast in the first place. I think everyone that's listening or watching now can relate to the fact that comment sections on social media can be really toxic places, that a lot of people either really want to engage with it or they really don't and they avoid it altogether. But actually what we're trying to do here is be a voice that brings like clarity and hope to these conversations, and that goes for our social media as well. And in saying that, you know, it's not all doom and gloom on social media. We have seen some really interesting and encouraging stories, so we're going to share a couple of those now. The first being over the Winter Olympics, I saw this kind of recurring theme of celebrating mothers who were also elite athletes. And this idea of them being lifted up and celebrated as mothers, not just for their sporting achievements, but in lots of different ways. This whole idea that when they had their team of people around them, not just family, but also their training teams and everything, that these women were enabled to thrive, not in spite of their biology, but actually they were enabled to thrive because people came alongside them and said, yes, you can be both. You can be a mother and an elite athlete. But no, I know, Dawn, that you've mentioned that isn't always the case for women in this space.
No, I do want to jump in here and say, well, I think it's fair to say neither you nor I are elite sports people, never have been, never will be, or sports people at any level at all. But I do think it's important to actually ask if anybody's listening or watching and they are involved in sport, either in a supporting role or they are athletes themselves, to get in touch, because it is a fascinating story when we see these elite women who have been enabled by nutritionists and physios and whatever number of people are supporting them to be successful in their field. What is it like just in your local sports team, whether it's hockey or football, netball, whether you're an athlete? You know, is it difficult to find that nutritional advice? Is it difficult to avoid injury? What sort of comments do you receive from people? Are they surprised? Because we do want to celebrate the female body, the human body that is designed to do so much. And yet so often, I think, in our sort of pro-both world, we talk about pregnancy being pathologized. It's seen nearly like a disease, as a hindrance. So what are the positive stories about being enabled to succeed, and maybe what hasn't been so positive? Have there been comments that maybe women have walked away from sport because they haven't been supported? Yeah, that'd be really interesting to hear from people.
Yeah, I really would. And then the other thing that caught my eye on social media, and I'm still in awe about this, is the fact that Heartbeat International released recently that over 8,000 babies have now been saved from chemical abortions through the Abortion Pill Reversal Network, which is just incredible to think that there's 8,000 people out there that have been saved from abortion, and it's this idea that, you know, these women were given, I suppose, true choice. They were given the option to change their mind, and we know that it's within like a very small window that they're able to take the progesterone. And this is something that we get into in an episode in season 1 if anybody's interested in the details, but it's that idea of fully informed choice. And it makes me wonder, is this information that women are they given this information when they, you know, are given abortion tablets? Like, is this information that women have to make this choice? Because fully informed consent and choice means that they're given all the information. In this case, what are your thoughts on that, Dawn?
Well, maybe if we link it to the athlete story that we just talked about, because I was just thinking within the context of informed decision making, of a few girls I know who were actually getting very involved in a particular, it was in swimming, but the degree to which their bodies were put under strain by that exercise did impact their fertility, not permanently, but temporarily in different ways. And again, I'm just wondering retrospectively how much they understood, or did they understand that that might be the case, and how to recover that then when it came to maybe planning or starting a family. And similarly, that informed decision making. What we do believe is that abortion pill reversal is not currently acknowledged within the NHS in the UK. So when women do seek maybe help to make a decision about a pregnancy that they're not sure whether they want to continue, and whenever potentially they contact an abortion provider and talk about medical abortion and the tablets, it is not currently the case that they are told, if you change your mind, there may be the potential that you can reverse the medication. So it's like an antidote to the abortion medication. It's not currently available in the NHS, abortion pill reversal. It's not acknowledged as something that's possible. And so women who are deciding to start an abortion and they maybe change their mind do not understand, or even are aware that there may be the potential possibility of continuing in the pregnancy and stopping the abortion. So it should be, I believe, considered again within the context of the United Kingdom. Is this something that within the NHS we could look at and monitor? Because certainly that headline figure of 8,000 babies being born, healthy babies and healthy mummies who stopped after the first set of pills with the chemical abortion and got the abortion pill reversal treatment, the progesterone, and then completed their pregnancy successfully. I think that is something to celebrate, and we should be talking about it more.
Absolutely. And if this is your first time hearing the words abortion pill reversal and you're like, what on earth is that? If you go to season 1 of our podcast, then we have an entire episode all about this with Dr. Dermot Carney. It's a fascinating conversation in this space. If you want to know any more about it, then that is where we'll be directing you to. Dawn, when can people expect to hear from us again? Because we have changed our upload schedule slightly in that we're now uploading every other week. So when can they expect to hear from us, and what can they expect to hear from your next conversation?
Yes, when people then come to listen or watch this conversation, it'll have gone live on Thursday, the 5th of March. So at some point they'll be listening or watching. And just so they know, then the second episode of season 2 will be available 2 weeks later. So that will be Thursday, the 19th of March. And we are hoping and planning, all being well, to be in conversation with Professor John Wyatt.
Well, we really hope that you will tune in then. As we've said before, all episodes of season 1 are available to stream now. But until then, we will see you next time.